Friends, today we are going to learn about the concept of public service. We know about public service. We want to join as a public servant with the government of India or with the government of the state. But what exactly is the concept of public service? So let's understand the concept of public service today. So let's first define what is public service. Public service is basically a service which is intended to serve all members of the community. There are different types of services. For example, there are many services which are provided by the private sectors, NGOs. But these are the type of services which are intended to serve only a particular class of people. If you pay for it, you are served. If you are not paying for it or you are not member of it, you will not get it. But when we talk about the public service, it is meant for the member of the community, all the people of the community. The second important thing is that public service is basically a service which is rendered in public interest. That means whatever we are doing in the public interest and not for the benefit of any individual or corporate or anybody else. And generally it is provided by the government to the people, either directly by the government or by financing provisions of the service. Most of the time the service is provided directly by the government, but sometimes government hires some outsourcing agency and then provide it. But the idea is that it will be paid from the public exchequer, either fully or partially. Now, some examples of the public services are healthcare, transport, police, fire brigade, or the removal of waste. And these are the things which are done for the public and in the public interest. And these are some of the examples of public service. Now, let's understand the basic philosophy behind public service. The public services are basically concerned with helping people rather than making a profit. When a private sector provides a particular service, their main goal is to make a profit. But when the public services are provided, it is basically to serve the people, help the people, rather than making profit. And there are certain basic services which must be available to all, regardless of income, physical ability, and mental acuity. So those are basically falling in the public service domain. For example, we all agree that everybody should get education, everybody should get healthcare, everybody should get a house, everybody should get a water, all those things which are necessary for all human beings. That is basically the responsibility of the public, and the public service is provided accordingly. Now let's understand what is the meaning of public servant. A public servant is a person who is employed in a government department or agency. Now, according to section 21 of the Indian Penal Code, a public servant includes commissioned officers of armed forces, judges, civil servants, elected representative of the parliament, state legislatures or municipality, and employees of the public sector undertaking and government universities. In short, all the people who are employed by the government or in any of the organizations which are financed by the government, all will be basically the public servants. Now, what are the different type of services which are provided by the public servants, or what are the functions of public servant? One function is enforcement of the rules and laws. These are done by the public servants like police, tax department, RTO, and organizations like that. Then investigation. If there is any offense committed, any crime is committed, then there is an investigation. Then tax collection is very important function of the public servant. Law and order, that is a very important function of the police department and a responsibility of the public servant. Defense of the nation. Then justice delivery, legislation, passing the laws, conducting elections, infrastructure development, public welfare schemes. Now, these are some of the examples of the different type of functions which the public servants perform. Now, let us now understand the accountability relationship in a service delivery. We know that public servants can be broadly categorized into two categories, the politicians and the civil servants. So, if we draw the relationship, we understand that civil servants work under the politicians, and the politicians are basically elected by the people, and the civil servants serve the citizens. So, if you draw this diagram, we get the diagram like this. On the top of it, we can see the politicians. Then the politicians control the public servants. Then the public servants serve the citizens. And finally, the citizens make the politicians accountable. So that means that the public servants, which are the civil servants, are not directly accountable to the citizens. If these civil servants are not performing their duties, in that situation, the citizens can't do anything. At the most, what they can do is that they can vote the politicians out of power. And therefore, the public servants, which are the civil servants, are generally not very accountable to the citizens. And this creates inefficiency, corruption, and all that. So let's now understand the three stages of accountability. In the first stage of accountability, there is a relationship between the politicians and the service provider, who can be said as public servants or the civil servants. Now, this relationship, that is the relationship between the politicians who are elected by the people and the service provider, that is the civil servants, it depends on the quality of the institution, rules, regulations, and incentive arrangements which are made through human resource policies. Because the civil servants are appointed by the act of the law under the constitution, their jobs are protected. Now, the politicians can't appoint the civil servants directly, nor can they remove. There are already rules which are made for this. So that means that the politicians have a limited control over the civil servants, and these are governed by the rules, institutions which are created for this purpose. At the second level, there is an interaction between the citizens and the policymaker or the elected representative. Now we know that the citizens elect the politicians who make the law or make the policy and also supervise the jobs of the civil servants. Now the interaction between the citizens and the politicians takes place through the channels where they express themselves, including votes, taxes, and the representation in the parliament and other political bodies. Ultimately, it is the people who elect the politicians into power and they make the laws and policies. So that is the second level of accountability. Now, the problem here is that the civil servants are not directly accountable to the citizens who are the direct beneficiary of the service. They are accountable only through the politicians. Now we can break the chain and we can directly empower the citizen, and that way we can make the civil servants accountable to the citizens directly. So under the citizen empowerment, there is a direct influence that the citizen can have on the service provider by providing them information through acts like RTI, Citizens Charter, Anti-Corruption, etc. That means through these acts, the citizens can directly take the civil servants to task. Through RTI, they can get the information. Through Citizens Charter, they can get a time-bound delivery of service. And if the bribe demand is made, then they can invoke the anti-corruption, make a complaint against the civil servants directly, and that way the civil servants will become directly accountable to the citizens. So these are the three stages of accountability. Ultimate goal should be to empower the citizens so that citizens can directly make the civil servants accountable to them. Now we'll talk about the drivers for improving the public service. How we can improve the public service and what are the different drivers. Now, World Bank's new global report, which was titled Improving Public Sector Performance Through Innovation and Interagency Coordination, this report states that positive changes is possible in many low and middle income countries. Normally, good governance is associated with the developed countries. But this World Bank report says that even the middle and the low level income countries can improve the quality of governance. Now, they have studied the performance of government of different countries, and they say that such changes does not necessarily require huge financial investment or complex IT system, and this can be done by any country, even if it is a poor country. And accordingly, the World Bank suggests 5 interconnected drivers of success. The first is the political leadership. The political leadership is very much important because the need of political will is there. If the political leadership is corrupt, inefficient, then the hope is not there. But if the political leadership is honest, efficient, that is the first requirement. Then institutional capacity building. Then what is required is that we can improve the quality of the civil servants by building the capacity, by training them. Incentive. The civil servants who work hard, they should be given incentive. In our system, all the civil servants get time-bound promotion, seniority-based promotion, and therefore they don't have much incentive to work very hard. So there has to be some incentive so that they get better pay, faster promotion. That is also very much necessary. Then fourth element is transparency. Whatever civil servants do, that should be known to the public so that they can be made accountable. And finally, the use of technology. We must try to use as much technology as possible because that will reduce the interaction between the civil servants and the public and corruption, and it will improve the efficiency. So friends, today we have learned about the concept of public service, and in next lecture we'll learn about the concept of public interest. Thank you very much. Friends, we know that one of the very important concept which we all must understand is the concept of public interest. We know that the public servants, whether they are politicians or whether they are the civil servants, judges, or anyone, they must work in public interest. But what is public interest? This is a very common term, but it is not easy to define. It is not easy to understand. So today we are going to learn about the principles and procedures of public interest, which is extremely important for the civil services preparation and particularly for ethics, integrity, and aptitude. So let us first understand what we understand by public interest. Public interest means the welfare or well-being of the general public in contrast to the selfish interest of a person, group, or firm. So as the definition clearly says, that public interest means the interest of the people in general. Instead of benefiting an individual person or a group or a particular firm or company, if we take an action which benefits the common people in general, that is what is called public interest. Public interest includes those activities which are necessary to the safety of the state and the welfare of the community. So two important aspects. First is that it should provide safety to the country, for example, the defense forces. And the second part is that it should do the welfare to the community. Now, some of the examples of the public interest could be like defense, police protection, education, public health and sanitation. So all these things are basically in the public interest, and so we will learn how we define what is in the public interest. But before we proceed for this particular lesson, we should understand what is the importance of public interest in respect of the legitimacy of power. Friends, we have different type of governments. Democracy is one form of government. Then we have dictatorship, we have communism, so many forms of government are there. But ultimately, the most legitimate government is one which serves the public interest. So public interest serves as the fundamental criteria for establishing the legitimation of power. If the people who are in power are not serving the public interest, then that government is not legitimate. Political power is legitimate and acceptable only in as much as it can be established that it serves the public interest. So public interest is the most important criteria for the legitimacy of the power. And accordingly, we can say that the best form of government for a given group or nation is one that is best suited to attain the public interest. So if you want to know which government is best, then the government which serves the public interest is the best form of government. And therefore, what happens that when the government is tyrannical, despotic, and totalitarian, then the public interest is determined by one or a very few people, which does not take into account what the group or nation sees as its interest. The meaning of this is very clear. When one person decides what is good for the public, that may not be necessarily good for the public. Public may be expecting something else from the government, but the people who are in power may be defining something else as the public interest. And so, what is perceived by the ruler as the public interest may not be perceived by the subjects as the public interest. And then the purpose is not served. Now let's talk about the importance of public interest in democracies. Now we know that democracy is today the most popular form of government around the world. Why? Because democracy is considered to be the best form of government because it serves the public interest through mechanism of representation and public debate. Because in the democracies, the public decides the ruler. You elect your representatives. And these representatives who become ministers or even prime minister and chief minister, If they don't serve the public interest, you can always recall them, you can elect somebody else. And therefore, they are duty bound to serve the public. Now the question is that are everything which is done by the government in the democracies is basically in public interest? How do we decide that the things are in public interest? Now the majority view does not always represent the public interest or public good. Sometimes what happens that majority may be demanding something, but that may not be public interest. For example, unjust war, genocide, or an unacceptable social practice or discrimination. So for example, people may want war to increase their territory, to get glory, and majority of the people may be wanting that. Majority of the people may be in favor of a particular type of discrimination based on caste or religion, but that does not become the public interest. As a matter of fact, sometimes the public interest is to act against the majority opinion, because majority of the people don't know what is in their best interest and in the interest of the country. For example, majority of the people would like to have the lowest tax rates, but if the taxes are not there, how the country is going to develop? So sometimes you have to act against the majority opinion in public interest. Now, public interest also cannot be defined in a patriarchal way by an enlightened elite. At the same time, we also cannot allow few individuals or an elite group to decide as to what is public interest. Just like the parents decide what is in the interest of the child, we cannot have that type of mindset also. So basically, we have to find some principles which must define the public interest and some procedures which are going to define public interest. So let's learn about them. So friends, there are 5 basic principles of public interest. Principle of participation, principle of charity, principle of subsidiary, principle of autonomy, and principle of transparency. So let's understand all the 5 principles of public interest. So the first important principle is the principle of participation. Friends, we know that in a democracy particularly, the sovereignty is basically with the people. Jantantra means people are the ruler. And so ultimately, they must participate in the governance process directly or indirectly. Citizens basically provide the foundation of political power and the legitimation of the distinction between government and governed. So we have to understand that citizens are the ultimate ruler, but they are also the governed people. And so this difference has to be reduced. That means the citizens must have some role in the government process. And so the people must participate in the decision making of the government. So whenever a policy is made, whenever important decisions are made, people must play an important role. And therefore, as far as possible, the draft proposals must be put up by the government in the public domain so that public can give their opinion, and they must be considered by the government before that is finalized. So people must be allowed to participate in the important decision-making process in the government. The second important principle is called the principle of charity. The principle of charity means that the resources of the governments should be used in the best possible manner, because these are the resources of the people. Whatever taxes are available with the country, these are paid by the citizens only. So this must be used, this must be distributed in a way that can benefit the largest number of people of the society. So whatever revenues are there with the government, whatever resources are there with the government, they must be used and distributed in such a way that largest number of people are benefited from that. The third important principle is called the principle of subsidiary. Now the principle of subsidiary basically means that the decision making should be at the ground level, at the lowest level. What happens sometimes that the decisions are taken at the top by the central government or the state government sitting at the capitals of the nation or the state. But that is not the right way of doing it. It is not necessary to take the decision at the national or state level to solve the problem for a local community, because there are many types of problems which can be best solved by the community, and there can be best methods which can be suggested by the community. And therefore, the decision should be taken as close as possible to the communities involved and not at the top level. So we should go to the bottom and find out as to what type of decisions are best for them, consult them, and then take the decision rather than taking the decision at the top level. Now we'll come to the fourth important principle of the public interest, and that is called the principle of autonomy. That means people should be given as much autonomy as possible to live their life. So the law should govern and regulate practices that reflect the life of the individual without imposing values to govern their actions. So the government should not tell the citizens as to what sort of values they should follow, what sort of dresses they should wear, what sort of food they should eat, what should be done, what should not be done. That should be decided as much as possible by the citizens themselves. Government does not have exclusivity on the meaning of life and what makes a life worth living. Because you see, everybody's concept of life is different. We all want to achieve different things in our life. Now, government should not try to enforce its view on all the population. So, government must allow the people to live the life in their own way, and that is also a very important meaning of the public interest. Because when the people are living the life in their own way, they will be most happy. The fifth important principle is called the principle of transparency. Now, friends, as they say, justice is not only to be done, but it is seen to be done. In the same way, government should be very transparent in their manner to get the trust of the people. Transparency and free communication of information is a very important condition of democracy, because that is the only way the rulers can be made accountable to the people who are the real ruler of the democracy. All the decision making of the civil servant must be transparent and accessible. So whenever we take a decision, that should be accessible to the citizens through the RTI and other provisions, through the communication, through the information technology, so that people know as to what decision has been taken and why a decision has been taken. Similarly, the decision must also state the reasons for taking the decision. Whenever a decision is taken, the reasons must be given as to why something has been accepted, why something has been rejected, so that the people can develop trust on the decision making. So friends, we have learned about the principles of the public interest, and now we'll learn about the procedures of the public interest. Friends, the civil servants play a very, very important role, not only in the administration of the laws and rules, but also in making of the laws and rules. And therefore, they are posted often in the secretariat and the ministries so that they can help the political leaders to draft the policies which can be passed by the parliament or the state legislature. So they should help the political executive to draft rules and procedures in the public interest. Because if the rules themselves are not in the public interest, then no public interest can be achieved. So they should help drafting the proper rules. Now, if the proposed policies by the political leadership is against the public interest, it is the duty of the civil servants to explain the adverse implication of such policy and convince the political leadership to modify the policy. Because they have a very important role to play in advising and drafting the policy. So if the elected representative want a policy which is against the public interest, they must come forward boldly, courageously, and tell them that this is not in the public interest, so that the best policies can be drafted. The public servants should also follow the code of ethics and the code of conduct very, very strictly and scrupulously. They should also observe the laws, rules, and regulations which are made in the country, because they are the role model for the civil society. If they don't follow the law, who else will follow the law? So that's also very important. They should observe the procedures which are prescribed under the law, instead of cutting corners, instead of, killing the people in false encounter, or, trying to get a quick solution. They should follow all the procedures which are prescribed under the law. They should also follow the international conventions like the human rights and the child labor. So, if you want to deliver the public interest, then these are the important procedures which we must follow. So friends, today we have learned about the principles and procedures of public interest. This is a very, very important lesson. It has got very wide implication, whether you are solving the objective questions, whether you are solving the questions of case studies. This is a very important chapter. I hope that you got good understanding of that. Thank you very much. Friends, we know that in any civilized society, there has to be a strong government, because government has to provide a good governance to the citizens. But we should also understand that the government officers are quite powerful. Now, what makes them so powerful? Why they are powerful? What right they have? So we have to learn today the philosophical basis of government. So let's proceed and understand first what is the meaning of governance at all. Now, governance is the process of decision making and the process by which the decisions are implemented. So we can see that the governance has 2 points, 2 steps. First, that you take the decisions. The second, that you implement the decisions. Generally, the decision making is done at the level of the elected people, politicians, and then the implementation is done by the civil servants. The term governance can be used in several contexts such as corporate governance, international governance, national governance, and local governance. But when we are talking about public services, governance represents the norms, values, and rules of the game through which the public affairs are managed. Now, in this particular context, we are actually talking about the governance which is related to the public. So, when we talk about the governance in the context of public service, then it basically means the type of norms which are there in the government, the type of values which the government officers follow, and the rules of the games, which basically deal the public affairs. And the machinery which is designed to provide governance is called government. Friends, every civilized society has to have a government. But the structure of the government, the method of governance has been constantly changing. So let's first understand what was the old models of governance. In the earlier times, people were governed by the kings who were believed to have the divine power to rule the people. And these kings were considered not only the representative of God, but also even descendant of gods. We know that almost all the characters, great characters, for example, Karna, Arjun, Bhim, they were all considered to be the son of some god. Even in the West, Alexander was also considered to be son of God. These kings actually projected themselves as the son of gods, and therefore they had the divine right to rule. And we know that only the son or daughter of a king possessed the divine right to rule the status. And the ordinary peoples were expected to obey the orders of the king, as the violation of the order would amount to disobeying the will of God. And therefore, the kings were not selected on merit. It was basically on the basis of the birth, and all the peoples were required to follow them without any condition, without any hesitation. And that was basically their duty. But as the society evolved, the concept of governance changed. So let's understand the modern concept of governance. In the modern world, people are unwilling to accept the concept of divine right to rule. As the society progressed, the people stopped believing that some people have the divine right to rule and that only the king's son can become a king. And so the modern concept of governance is based on its legitimacy and obligation between the government and the governed to achieve a common goal. Here the governed, that is the common citizen, and the government, they come from the same pool. Any citizen can become a government officer or even the minister or prime minister or the president. And so it is basically a contract. Both of them have an obligation toward each other. Now, when we talk about the modern form of governance, in the modern time, we have democracy and communism. These are the 2 main models which are governing the world today. Now, let's understand the philosophical basis of modern government. The philosophical basis of modern government is based on the concept of social contract. Now, what is the meaning of that? The meaning is that people surrender certain rights to the government for common good, while the government protects the other rights and ensure maximum liberty, happiness, and development. That means the individuals will surrender certain rights to the government, and the government will use those rights for the common welfare. But government has the duty to protect all the other rights of the citizen. This is something which is called social contract. And this social contract and the similar theory of state of nature was given by Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. We have already discussed the theory of Thomas Locke. We'll discuss the theory of John Locke in the next chapter. Now, the concept of the public or the citizens have changed considerably over a period of time. Earlier, they were to blindly obey the direction of the kings. Now, we have the philosophy of libertarianism. Now, what is the philosophy of libertarianism? This word libertarianism comes from the Latin word libertas, which basically means freedom. And this libertarian basically seeks to maximize the political freedom and autonomy, emphasizing individualism, freedom of choice, and voluntary association. The meaning here is that everybody should have the freedom to do what they want to do in their life. They should have the freedom of choice, whatever they want to do. And if at all, they have an obligation that should be voluntary and not compulsory. The libertarian philosopher Robert Nozick, he asserted that a right to choose freely to live our life as we please, provided we respect other people's right to do the same. So the thing is that we have the absolute right to live the life the way we want. Only thing is that we should not interfere into the right of other people. Libertarians basically share a skepticism of authority and state power and wishes to restrict their powers. Libertarians don't want authoritative state. They don't want the state to exercise too much of control, what to eat, how to dress, what to drive. All those things should be minimal. And according to them, an individual is the unit of value, and liberty of the individual is essential precondition for human to flourish. What it says is that unless the people have the liberty, they will not be able to achieve their potential and reach to the best of their condition. And therefore, what we need is that the individual should decide what is in their best interest. They are the owner of their own self. And from here comes the idea of self-ownership. Now, this particular idea of self-ownership was developed by Nozick and John Locke. And according to this idea, an individual has sovereign right over themselves as well as the possessions they own. That means I have to decide what I want, and whatever I possess, whatever is my possessions, it is my choice how I want to spend that, how I want to use that. Now, these type of rights include the right to control the use of an entity or possession, includes the right that others cannot use it without one's consent, and the right to transfer these rights to others by sale, rental, gift, or loan. So whatever money we have, whatever property we have the full right how we are going to use that, and that is something which is part of the self-ownership. The concept of self-ownership also includes the right to compensation in case others use them without one's consent. It also means the enforcement of rights, including the right to restrain people from violating these rights. That means that it is the responsibility of the government to see that every citizen has this right and these rights are protected. And if anybody violates that right, action should be taken against such people. The basic concept is that nothing can be done to a person without their consent. So anything can be done. Like if I fight a boxing match, I can be injured, but that is my consent. The idea is that nothing can be done without my consent. And so this is the fundamental concept of self-ownership. So friends, we have seen that the philosophical basis of governance is that the individuals have this self-ownership. Individuals should have the ability to decide what they want to do with their life, as long as they don't violate any law. But at the same time, they must follow the contract, the social contract which they have with the government. They have to perform their duties, and the government has to protect their rights. We'll know more about that in the next chapter. Thank you very much. Friends, today we are going to learn the social contract theory of John Locke. We have already learned something about the social contract theory in the previous lessons. We will learn this social contract theory more in detail now. So let's first understand the concept of social contract. Now, initially humans were in the state of nature, which was apolitical, as there was no government and each individual retained his or her natural rights. What it means is that in the ancient society, just like what is prevailing in the jungles right now, just like animals have all their rights, the humans also had all their rights, and they were staying in the state of nature. And these natural rights include the right to life, liberty, and property, because they were given by God to all his people. And John Locke's idea were basically later paraphrased into one of the most famous phrases in the Declaration of Independence of America, that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these are basically the original rights which all the people had. Now let's understand what is the state of nature. Now the state of nature was basically a state where all the individuals have all the rights and they could do anything. But this was basically very inherently unstable, as any individual could have captured the property of other people and harm them. Just like in the jungle, the more powerful person can always harm the less powerful people. The same thing, this was a very unstable society. And so people were unable to live peacefully and pursue any goal in their life. And therefore, in order to bring order, people collectively chose to form a government for the sake of stability, and in exchange, they decided to relinquish some of their rights to a central authority while retaining other rights. And therefore, a civilized government is like a social contract in which the individuals relinquish certain rights for the government, and in exchange, they receive protection from the physical harm and security of their possession from the government. And this basically gives them the ability to interact and cooperate with other human beings in a very stable environment, because the government protects their other rights. And therefore, the government also has an obligation to be responsive to the needs and the desires of these citizens. So the citizens who have given their rights, they require protection from the government. So the obligation is not only from the part of the citizens, but also from the part of government. So now let's talk about what are the rights of citizens, which the government is required to protect. Citizens has relinquished only some of their original rights and not all rights. It means that no government can claim absolute power over all aspects of a citizen's life. So the control of the government has to be minimum. You can't control all aspects of the citizen's life. Now, despite living under the social contract, the citizens continue to have the right to life, liberty, and property. These are the rights which cannot be taken away by any government. And a government which failed to adequately protect these three rights, that is life, liberty, and property, and interest of the citizens, or the government which attempted to overstep its authority and try to take more rights, would be failing to perform the task for which it was created. That means the government has been given certain tasks, that is to protect these rights. And if they try to capture more rights or they fail to protect these rights, then they are failing to perform their duties. Now, according to John Locke, in such a situation, that citizens would be entitled to revolt and replace the existing government with one which would suitably carry out the duties of ensuring peace and civil order while respecting individual rights. So if the government failed to protect these rights, then the government can be replaced by another government and the citizens have the right to revolt. Now, let's understand what are the obligations on the part of government and on the part of citizen. So first of all, let's understand what are the responsibilities of the government. The government must provide to all citizens the fundamental right of life, equality, justice, right to livelihood. It should provide freedom of speech, practice of religion. It should provide law and order. It should provide basic facilities like education, healthcare, and housing. At the same time, the citizens also have certain obligations. They are obliged to obey the rules, laws, and procedures which are made by the government. They should not commit crime or corruption. They should not harm other members of the society. They should follow the culture and tradition of the society. They should help each other for mutual growth of all members of society. So friends, these are obligations of the citizens. So both the government and the citizens are required to fulfill their part of the obligation, and then only a country can grow, then only a society can grow, then only we can have love, happiness, and peace in the society. So friends, we have learned today the social contract theory of John Locke. I hope that you got the concept. If you have any doubt, you can ask in the doubt section. Thank you very much. Friends, today we are going to learn about probity in governance. This is a very important chapter of ethics, integrity and aptitude paper. It has many components, and we will be discussing about the different components in the subsequent classes. But today we are going to discuss about the basic concepts of probity in governance. So first of all, let us understand what is the meaning of governance. So governance can be defined as the process of decision making and the process by which the decisions are implemented. So there are two parts in governance. The first is the process of decision making, and the second is the process by which the decisions are implemented. So for example, you make the decision, you make the law by going to the parliament, by the executive like the elected government, and then it is implemented at the ground level by the different departments. Now the governance can be used in several contexts such as corporate governance, international governance, national governance, and local governance. So the governance can be at different levels. For example, in the corporate, in the national level, at the international level, and even at the local level like the municipal level. Now the governance basically represents the norms, values and rules of the game through which the public affairs are managed. So when we are talking about the governance, it means the norms, the values and the rules of the games using which we govern the public affairs. So governance is basically dealing with the public affairs. And in order to provide the governance, we create a machinery which is called government. So government is the machinery by which we implement the governance, and governance is basically the process of decision making and the implementation of decisions. Now let's talk about the probity in governance. What is the meaning of probity in governance? Probity basically means having strong moral principles and following them with honesty and integrity. So please understand that probity is the application of the moral standards which we have learned earlier in the government processes, that basically can be called as probity. And whatever moral principles we have learned, we have to implement those moral principles with full honesty and integrity. So when we are talking about the public servants, like the civil servants, and in that context, if we define probity, that basically means that we have to maintain the highest level of honesty and integrity, not only in the professional life, but also in the personal life by the public servants or the civil servants. So please understand that when we are talking about the probity in governance, what we mean is that in our personal life, in our professional lives, we have to follow the moral standards with full honesty and integrity. Probity basically encompasses all the good values and virtues which we have learned so far, and if we follow probity in public life, that means we are working in the ethical manner, and therefore probity is a reflection of the ethical behavior of the public servants. In Hindi, probity is often called Satya Nishtha, and therefore we can say that the probity is an essential and vital requirement for efficient and effective system of governance and for socio-economic development. So if you want socio-economic development, if you want the government to be effective, then the government must have probity. If the government lack probity, that means it is not honest government, then people don't respect that government, and therefore the implementation of the rules and laws become difficult and the country cannot develop. Now let us talk about the different components of probity. In public service, the probity will include the following components. The first is integrity. The government officers must have integrity, and we have discussed earlier that integrity basically means the financial integrity, that means you should be non-corrupt. Second is professional integrity, that means you should be competent in your professional discharge of duties. And the third is intellectual integrity, which basically means that you should take the judgment based on your best judgment and not be driven by any other consideration or by any pressure or temptation. The second important component is that the laws, rules and regulations must be effective, strong, so that it has the requisite deterrent effect on the people who are breaking the law. Then the third important component is the fair implementation of law by the civil servants. So laws can be excellent, but unless they are implemented in the proper manner, it does not serve the purpose. So we have to be very fair and the implementation has to be very effective. The next requirement is the robust institutions. So all the institutions of the government should be robust, they should be independent, and they should follow the rule of law. And finally, the meaning of probity is that we should be guided by the ethics and values from Indian and Western philosophers and thinkers. So whatever are the moral rules that we should follow in our day-to-day life, in professional as well as in personal life. Let us now discuss the different steps which are required for promoting probity in public life. So if you want to promote the probity in public life, we have to strengthen the anti-corruption measures. Then information sharing and transparency has to be increased. Then ensure the quality of service delivery, ethical government, work culture, and utilization of public funds. The anti-corruption measures can be further divided into legal measures, that means making laws, for example, Prevention of Corruption Act, PCA, or Prevention of Money Laundering Act, or PMLA, and many other laws like that. The second type of measures are institutional measures, that means creating strong institutions for preventing corruption. For example, Central Bureau of Investigation CBI, Central Vigilance Commissioner, that is CVC, Central Vigilance Officer, that is CVO, then Enforcement Directorate and Lokpal. So these are the different institutions which has been created to strengthen the anti-corruption measures. Then within the information sharing and transparency, we have legislations like Right to Information Act. In order to ensure quality of service delivery, we have the provisions like Citizen Chartered and e-governance. Then in order to ensure the ethical government, we have codes of ethics and codes of conduct. So today we have learned about the probity in public life, and we will learn more about that in the subsequent lessons. Thank you very much.